To get us in the Halloween spirit, we're revisiting some horror classics like Black Christmas.
A high school girl's been murdered. Mr. Harrison's daughter is missing. And now at the house where she lives, the other girls are getting obscene phone calls.
Yeah, what I've done is I've tapped this phone so that when it rings, it'll ring at the station house, too.
There was a little girl murdered over in the park tonight.
Yes, I heard.
Your phone's ringing.
Hello?
That's a bit of the trailer for Black Christmas. The Canadian movie about a killer stalking young women arrived in theaters 50 years ago. It did so alongside another horror classic, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Our pop culture columnist Rad Simonpillai joins us to discuss how Black Christmas has influenced the slasher movie as we know it. Hey, Rad.
Hey, Dave.
Oh.
Hey, actually, wait. Hey, Dave. Okay, no. Halloween, no. Okay. I'm going to cough up a lung here.
All right, so 50 years, it's hard to believe, 50 years ago, Black Christmas arrived in Canadian theaters just in time for Halloween. So tell us what people were in for.
Well, they were in for one of the all-time great, most terrifying, and timely horror movies. All right, because you think about it, this is 1974, and Roe versus Wade is just over a year old in the U.S. So women's bodily autonomy was, and somehow still is, a controversial subject. And that was feeding into the very intense environment that Black Christmas found so scary. Because you watch that movie, like there's a character in the movie that bluntly says, "I'm having an abortion," which was extremely rare to hear in a movie at that time, right? And that in the movie, that puts her in this precarious situation with her boyfriend. So, the misogyny that the movie's about, this hatred towards women, this toxic energy that's directed at its characters, these smart, educated, sexually empowered sorority girls, that all of that is there even before a serial killer starts picking them off one by one. And the distinguishing motif in this movie are the phone calls. Because, before they even realize that they're violently under attack, the girls keep receiving these horrifying prank calls. And I think the calls are actually more frightening in the movie than the kills. Because, you're hearing these ungodly sounds and voices and moans and screams where it sounds like a man is both having way too much fun but also unleashing pain on himself and others. And those calls, they tap into this misogyny that is just as toxic and violent now as it was back then, which is why I think these phone call scenes are no less terrifying 50 years later.
Wow. Now, Black Christmas is apparently based on a bit of an urban legend, right?
Yeah, it's partly based on The Babysitter and the Man Upstairs, which is iconic urban legend. The story goes, a babysitter's watching TV after she put the kids to bed, and she keeps receiving these calls and then the caller, he keeps telling her, check on the children. So she's dismissing the calls at first, but as he keeps insisting, she gets frightened and then calls the police, who then trace the prank calls, and then the police tell her, get out because the calls are coming from inside the house. That's the basis for the iconic line from Black Christmas.
As soon as you said that, I just started to smile. And just now, okay.
Yeah, it's like an instant no. Like as soon as you say that line, everyone we know that's the one. Yep.
Sydney. Anyway, now Black Christmas, a Canadian movie, right? Back when Canadian movies, there weren't that many of them. So,
yep.
What did this mean for Canadian film?
I mean, look, it's one of the earliest Canadian films that would travel, right? That would make it across the border or make its mark on global film culture, but not immediately. Because when it was initially released in the U.S., it didn't really hit. Because, first of all, Warner Brothers, when they released it, they changed the title to Silent Night, Evil Night, because they thought Black Christmas would be confused with blaxploitation films. And so on its initial release, it wasn't a hit, but it's since been re-released under the original title and has grown in cult status, right? You got Tarantino calling it a monumental influence. Canadian movies. We're talking about a movie that was shot in Toronto, stars Margot Kidder, Andrea Martin, these Canadian stars. By the way, Andrea Martin was actually replacing Gilda Radner, who was originally supposed to star in Black Christmas until she got this spot on this upcoming show called SNL. Little thing. And, like according to Jeff Pevier, Canadian film critic, he wrote this article about this in Hollywood Suite. He said the movie, when it was released, it was a bigger hit in Canada than any other Canadian classics before. And of course, Canadian classics before, we're thinking of like Going Down the Road, right? But its success, Black Christmas's success, upset Canadian critics and gatekeepers, because to them, Canadian film was all about capturing documentary-style realism and culture and grappling with social issues. Trying to make a Hollywood horror picture was cheap and trashy to them. And this is the thing, like Black Christmas, people often call it like it's going for trashy, but it's not really, because it's so incredibly well made and thoughtful and engaged, and more so than I think a lot of the slasher movies it would inspire.
It does have a sort of look too, right? Kind of almost like a lo-fi look, which I feel like is coming back a little bit in horror movies. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, they're trying to capture the aesthetic of Black Christmas nowadays. Well, also because a lot of these new, like when you look at Long Legs and stuff, they're trying to recreate that 16 millimeter, 8 millimeter look on like that film look now. So that's part of it, but they can't capture the vibe.
No,
of Black Christmas.
Real houses, real Toronto houses that nobody can afford now.
Oh my God, I was literally like thinking about like visiting that house, the Black Christmas house. I mean, and then getting chased away by security.
Well, tell me. You mentioned, it was a huge influence on the slasher genre. So how did Black Christmas become a template for that?
Well, what it did was it took inspiration from Hitchcock's Psycho and the Italian giallo films, and it honed all of these different influences into what we now recognize as the slasher template. Because you have, of course, the thematic connections, the misogyny of the serial killer stalking assertive women. Though I think, when you look at later like slasher movies, like the women in those movies don't necessarily always hold the same esteem. They don't necessarily hold the same esteem for their female characters the way Black Christmas did. But yeah, like Black Christmas introduces the idea of the final girl, who's the heroine who survives to the end. I think the most identifiable thing is, like, the influence is the POV shots, where you're moving slowly along, trapped in the killer's perspective. And that's something you'll immediately recognize from John Carpenter's Halloween, which, of course, like that's the movie that solidified what the slasher movie is and made it, a smash hit genre. And, the influence Black Christmas has on Halloween, I think, is way more intricate than a lot of us expected, because I think a lot of us knew that John Carpenter was a fan of Black Christmas and took inspiration from it. But according to Black Christmas director Bob Clark, John Carpenter asked him, like, hey, if you were to make a sequel to Black Christmas, if you were to continue the story of your villain Billy, what would the sequel be about? And here we have a clip, a little bit of a feature called On-Screen Black Christmas, where Bob Clark is recalling his response to John Carpenter, telling us what he would have done with Billy. Have a listen.
It'll be he was captured. After all, he was put in an institution, and the movie will begin the night he escapes back in town, and they don't know it yet, and I'm going to call it Halloween.
What? Michael Myers is Billy. Okay, like, that's Bob Clark describing how his idea for a Black Christmas sequel became John Carpenter's Halloween.
Man, that's so cool. Also, we are marking on this Halloween season the 50th anniversary of another classic. Oh, I'm smiling again. That is obviously the Chainsaw Was the Dead giveaway. The 50th anniversary trailer for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Rad, how did this film contribute to the slasher genre?
Well, yeah, I think if Black Christmas set the template for the slasher film as we know it, Texas Chainsaw Massacre whet America's appetite for it, all right? And yes, Dave, I am using the word appetite very intentionally. As you know, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is about an inbred country family of cannibals helping themselves to the flesh of hippies, prepared for them by their chainsaw-wielding son, whose name is...
Leatherface.
You can see me. I was pointing at you. I guess you couldn't see me. And look, like Black Christmas, this was a movie of its time, right? Like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it was tapping into the political upheaval of the late 60s and early 70s, and it's seizing on this tension that's felt across the country with Vietnam and Nixon all over the news. I mean, really, the movies are kind of like Deliverance, right? In slasher movie mode, but before we knew what the slasher movie would be, because it's capturing this animosity between hippie city kids and country folk, and how that bubbles over into terror and fear and violence. And I think that's just one reason Texas Chainsaw Massacre is just as terrifying as it was today as it was back then.